So today we're going to learn about the New Journalism Collective, which, if you haven't come across it, it's an experimental democratic platform for reporting unexamined perspectives across the country. And specifically, it features youth perspectives, perspectives of high school journalists, and highly encourage you to check out the platform. It's really amazing what these students have put together. And TNJC, as they call it, was co-founded by high school seniors who are alumni of the Al Newharth Free Spirit and Journalism Conference. Many of its contributors are also Free Spirit alumni. They are united by their way of dreaming, daring, and doing, as we say at the Free Spirit Conference, dream, dare, do. And they tell stories for TNJC based on these values: transparency, empathy, context, and community. So today we'll hear more about that. I'm Catherine Cheney. I'm a journalist and coordinator of the Free Spirit alumni community. I'm a Free Spirit alum myself. And today I'm joined by TNJC co-founders Josh Mizore, a high school senior from Dallas, Texas, and Joshua Yang, a high school senior from Palo Alto, California, as well as TNJC managing editor Willa Poland McLean, a high school senior from Portland, Oregon. Thank you all so much for taking the time to talk about your work on TNJC.
Of
So
course,
I want to start.
We're excited.
Yeah, thank you all. I want to start with Josh and Joshua, and I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about how you first met. And my understanding is this actually precedes the virtual 2020 Al Newharth Free Spirit and Journalism Conference, where you both represented your states as Free Spirit awardees. But how did the two of you first come together?
Josh, you want to take a go at this answer?
Yeah, I'd love. So Joshua and I, aside from our shared name connection, which we always like to laugh about the irony that we share that, we actually met at a program called J Camp. So we met at J Camp 2019 in Atlanta, Georgia. We met that first week of August. J Camp is a high school journalism program run by the Asian American Journalists Association, AAJA. So we were there for a week. And although we were on different teams while we were there doing different work, we happened to be suite mates. So whether playing card games or just chatting late at night, we really got to know each other inside the industry and in the mini industry, I guess, with J Camp, but also as friends, as high schoolers. Josh, if you want to touch on that.
Sure. I mean, when I first met Josh, he was just about the first person from Texas I'd met in my life. And the two of us came from super different backgrounds. I came from a very traditional print background. Josh came from more of a broadcast background. I think my final project for J Camp was writing a 2,000-word article. Josh, I can't remember what yours was, but I'm pretty sure you didn't write anything, and
I
you
did
were on
not.
the sort of like you were on the multimedia side. And then afterwards, we sort of somewhat stayed in touch, but sort of lost touch for about a year. And then I want to say, come like around this time last year, maybe a month later, Josh messages me out of the blue saying, "Hey, are you an Al Newharth Free Spirit scholar?" And it turns out that both of us happen to represent the states that we're from. And so we happened to connect again at the Free Spirit Conference. I remember while it was going on, we sort of had a back channel chat where the two of us were talking about what we were learning and sort of our critiques of what was happening with the journalism industry. And then when all of that was over, for the third time, Josh reaches out to me. He's like, "Hey, I have an idea. Can we call?" And he pitches this idea of building a national student-led publication to me. And from there, and I'm happy to talk about this more, we just sort of started iterating. We started going through different publication systems and styles and mediums. And that's sort of how the New Journalism Collective was born.
That's great. Josh, can you expand a little bit on the void that you saw? What led you to call Joshua and say, "Hey, we need to do this"?
Sure. I think, honestly, the Free Spirit Conference really helped ground both of us in the reality of what the journalism industry was, especially with COVID and what was happening with new sensationalism and just seeing the headlines and, feeling as if students were not being represented in the most accurate way. I think we saw that the youth voice is really what we wanted to portray as an organization, showing that at TNJC, these kids, we know these teachers that are here on school campuses every day being affected by real-time changes in the United States. So Joshua and I posed the idea of TNJC as to really get that unfiltered voice. And I think later when we talk about some of our favorite pieces, the most poignant products that we have created, that'll really come to light. And that these issues that students face every day, especially with this pandemic, I think TNJC has been a beacon in terms of shining a light on what's really happening.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm glad you mentioned the need for this, especially during this pandemic. I mean, you all are high school seniors. You're coming up toward high school graduation. And yet, I know many of your fellow Free Spirit scholars have spent this entire year remote, staring at screens, disconnected from their peers. And so I would think that the power of storytelling and the ability to get your voice out there is more critical than ever. I'd love to hear your take on that. And maybe that's a way to bring Willa into this. Willa, can you tell me a little bit more about how you learned about the New Journalism Collective and what appealed to you about the opportunity to get involved initially?
Yeah, so I learned about the New Journalism Collective again through the Al Newharth Free Spirit and Journalism Conference, because I think that Joshua and Josh originally were kind of pitching this to other Free Spirits. And so I was hearing about it from other scholars and decided I wanted to try getting involved. And I ended up really liking it. I think that particularly during COVID, having this platform where I was able to connect with people from all over the country, beyond the conference, which was just a couple days, and also get to do reporting and writing that was featuring the voices of students across the country. That was a really exciting opportunity for me, especially, I've been remote for the whole year. And so it's been really hard on my school publication. We didn't even have class for the first semester, and so we weren't really producing content.
Wow.
And so it was a really great outlet for me to have TNJC to practice my writing skills and get to do reporting on a scale that's a lot broader than I've been able to do with my school's publication, and to really keep that going despite the challenges that my typical school publication was facing and that we're all facing with the pandemic. So yeah, I really think that's a strength of TNJC, is the way that it's kind of brought together students from all over the country and the way that it can kind of connect students in that way.
Absolutely. I was going to ask how the three of you balance your commitments working for your high school publications with your commitments with TNJC, which I'm sure can be hard. But Willa, I didn't even think about how in some cases, actually, your high school publications might not be publishing at the rate they were before when students are distributed and remote and learning from home. So that's a really interesting point. I want to bring it back to Joshua, because Joshua, you were starting to get into, or you alluded to how we could return to this idea of really operationalizing on this vision. So you and Josh talk about this idea. You reach out to your fellow Free Spirit scholars who, again, is just amazing to me. You all came together remotely in 2020. We hope to bring you together in person in the future, but you meet remotely. You have this shared experience where you're learning about journalism and the First Amendment over the course of a week. You have this vision for a platform that might bring these voices together. What were the next steps? How did you actually operationalize on that idea?
Sure. So, first of all, I got to give credit to the Al Newharth Free Spirit Conference. Most of our work was cut out for us when we were basically given a list of the best student journalists from every single state. And
that's a good starting point.
That was a good starting point. That was a great starting point. But really, it came down to we needed people who sort of had that same idea of us, that we need to be able to turn student journalists and give them a voice to reach like a national platform. I think, and I will get back to your question in just a second, but I think that one of the issues that we've all seen on our own news publications is that we need to keep a local angle. So if we're covering very recently, I've been covering anti-Asian hate in my school newspaper. If that happens, we need a local angle, right? I'm from the California Bay Area. We need to say, like, this is what's going on in the California Bay Area with respect to anti-Asian hate crimes, etc. But then when you're talking about stories of national significance that people from all across the country should probably be aware of, then it's like you can't cover it because there's no local angle. So that's sort of where TNJC came in for us. And a really good example was very early on. I believe we wanted to cover the California wildfires. And so that had relevance where I was, but not necessarily as much where like Josh is. And so we were able to cover that on the fact that we were a national platform. As for operational logistics, that was a long, winding road, and as I said, we had many, many iterations. From the very start, we had a much smaller team of basically just reporters, and our idea was to produce lengthy, we called them long form stories, so stories around 1,000, 2,000 words. But then we very quickly realized that that's not the best way to reach young people. We call ourselves experimental because first and foremost, we are based on Instagram. We have a website, but Instagram is sort of our main vehicle for news distribution. And so we very quickly pivoted toward going off of making Instagram graphics. We recruited very heavily for an amazing design team that used Adobe Illustrator to put out a bunch of graphics. And that's sort of where we skewed. And then later on, of course, we started coming back into the idea of having longer stories. We were thinking about having video content. I know we set up an amazing podcast. And so it's been branching out a lot. But I think the Free Spirit Scholar Conference, when we met all of those really interesting, really insightful people, that's where it all started for us.
Great. And I wanna zoom in on, you mentioned that you're experimental. And I was so struck by how you have these stated values on your site. One, you're an experimental democratic platform, as you say, featuring these unexamined perspectives from across the country. And you have these values: transparency, empathy, context, community. So I just wanted to first say kudos to you, because I feel like you started from the outset with these values in place. And I think a lot of news organizations are now scrambling to, in the process of better connecting with their communities and establishing trust, figure out, okay, what are our values and how do we communicate them? But you figured that out from the outset. I just think that's really admirable and commendable. And I wonder, can you just speak to that a little bit? Like, how did you come together not only to set up a website, get content out there, set up your Instagram profile, but actually come together around values that you wanted to live up to every day? What did that look like?
Josh, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I know when Josh and I were first concepting, the most important thing for us was our values. We needed to figure out what really drove us to do this project in the first place. I think a large portion of our brainstorming and our concepting at the very beginning centered around this idea. I think we spent 2 months choosing our color palette, our font. Those are the more design aesthetic parts of it. But really, Joshua and I rewrote our mission statement until we finally narrowed it down to a brief, terse statement that really does encapsulate what TNJC is, what it should be, what it should serve to do in society, what it should serve as a model for what we say the youth voice wants to see in media. And I think over the course of our publication cycles, we obviously changed our prerogative. We did long form stories, we did short form, we did graphics, we did podcasts, like Joshua mentioned. The one thing that stayed constant throughout were the values. And I think that has really shined throughout our pieces.
Yeah, I love that. And so speaking of your pieces, earlier Joshua mentioned the California wildfires. Willa, I'd love to bring you into this just to give an example from your perspective of a piece of reporting that speaks to the value of TNJC, a story that you might not find anywhere else, that really highlights why there's a need for a platform like this. What jumps to mind for you?
Yeah, I think there are a few. One that comes to my mind is we did a piece about sports recruiting during COVID. And I think that was a great example of a topic that like mainstream newspapers just really weren't talking about. We've heard a lot of mainstream news talking about like the disappointments of high school students and everything that's happening during COVID, but they're not really getting specific about what those things are or actually bringing in the perspective of those students. And so I felt like that piece was a really strong example of something that is relatable to a national high school audience, because a lot of people were dealing with having their sports recruitment messed up and their college applications messed up, and this really kind of crucial time in their life unexpectedly changed. And I think that it was really, we did a great job of bringing in student perspective from across the country to kind of give voice to that experience and show our readers who might not be aware of that or involved in it what that experience was like, but then also kind of provide a relatable piece for other students who might be experiencing that. And so, you know, we've talked about the values of empathy, and I think that that's a really great example of using empathy in the stories that we're putting out to kind of show our readers that this is something that's happening and we're giving voice to it because people aren't alone in it.
Absolutely. Joshua, Josh, any other examples that jump to mind for you in terms of pointing to why a platform like this is needed?
Sure, I can jump in. I think one of perhaps the highlights for journalism work this year was the 2020 election and our coverage of it. And, you know, what happens very commonly when, you know, you try to get student perspectives on things like politics is you will skew toward interviewing people from the West Coast and people from the East Coast. And just by benefit of basically knowing at least one person in every single US state, we were able to get a lot more in depth from that. So one of the things we did for the coverage in the run up to the 2020 election was we profiled first time like 18-year-old voters and asked them about their thoughts. Now, sure, we got people from California. We got people from, you know, the East Coast. But we also got people from Texas. We got people from Georgia. We got people from South Dakota, from Iowa, from Kentucky, what have you.
That's great.
And so that contributed to a much more diverse outpouring of opinion and featured a much more diverse collection of student voices. So it was still sort of like, yes, I'm voting for Biden, or yes, I'm voting for Trump. But the reasons that people gave, I think that was so much more insightful than if we only had featured, you know, again, people from the West Coast and the East Coast. And so I think being able to be that transparent about where we're getting our student voices from, and making a conscious effort to feature a wide range of voices. Now, I know that both sidesism is a problem that the media has struggled with, and that's also something that's featured in our discussions a lot. How can we balance a lot of different voices without giving too much of a platform to a very marginalized voice that maybe doesn't necessarily deserve a platform? But I think our coverage and the run up to the 2020 election is something that it's one of the pieces I'm most proud of.
So something that strikes me about what you just said is just not only the value that you all are creating for your audience, but the value you all are getting out of this experience. Like when you just now mentioned both sidesism, the experience you're getting bringing contributors from across the country together around a digital platform, you've created an experience for yourselves. I would assume, I know your high school publications are also doing amazing things, but I would assume the experience that you've created with the New Journalism Collective is providing you all and your contributors with learning experiences they might not be getting at their high school publications. I mean, this is just the next level in terms of the collaboration you're doing from across the country. And I would think an experience that will set you up very well for careers you might pursue in journalism. So any thoughts on that? I don't want to speak for you, but do you think you're gaining skills and insights through your work on TNJC that go even further than all the great experience you've gotten from your high school publications?
I think I'll jump here. One thing I think that is super unique about TNJC, that is incredible, is the fact that we don't have an advisor. Most high school publications will have an advisor or a faculty sponsor
Yep.
or some degree of adult supervision. When we say TNJC is entirely student run, we mean it. It is students at the forefront
Yep.
creating publication schedules. Our whole infrastructure, we communicate via Slack, our Google Drive, how we format Google Documents, the website, everything is student based, which I don't think hardly any other school publication could say in the entire country. That in and of
Hmm.
itself is what makes TNJC unique. One thing I also would love to mention is that everyone here chose a different piece for what their favorite theme was from TNJC. For me, I was going to say the winter storm that happened here in Texas. Here I am sitting
Hmm.
without power, huddling over my laptop, and I have people around the nation, fellow students, saying, "Let's get together. Let's write a piece about what's going on, and let's get
Wow.
real students who are in Texas right now dealing with this and get their voices out right now because people need to understand what's going on." That type of collaboration, that type of empathy, that type of communication, it's honestly unheard of. And when I saw all that come together and culminate in that one piece, for me, I was like, whoa, we're really doing something here. It went from being something that was an idea, sort of nebulous in nature, to a real grounded thing that we could enjoy.
That's such a great example. Thanks for bringing it up. So I love this. You are experimental, democratic, and unsupervised. I think that's another great value of TNJC. So I want to understand where you go from here. So, you've set up this platform, you've been experimenting over the past year, despite the many challenges of COVID-19. I think, as you said, it's made the need for this platform. It's made this platform even more needed. But where do you go from here? I know, as we said before, you're approaching high school graduation. I'm assuming you're all off to school. I'd love to hear what's next. What's next for TNJC? Are you going to be continuing this in college? Are you going to be passing the baton on to other high school students? What's the future of the platform?
Sure. I think, you know, at the core of it, Josh and I were having discussions about this. TNJC is not about the two of us or the three of us or any certain number of people. We've recruited very heavily over the course of these past few months. And once we go off to college, I think it shouldn't be about us anymore. It should be about the people who are willing to step up and continue the work that we've been doing and expand it in different directions. So yes, we are passing the baton down, and I can say that I am super excited to see where the sort of next generation of TNJC leaders will take the publication and take the platform. But again, it's sort of about this decentralized process. Very early on, Josh and I tried this sort of strict hierarchy model. And that was difficult to run, actually. And we discovered that one of the best ways to run TNJC, especially as Josh mentioned, without an advisor, is to just have a more democratic system. Again, that's sort of where the word democratic features into our values. Josh and I
Yeah.
will coordinate sort of the overhead on everything, and Willa's been fantastic in coordinating with the rest of the staff. But we give a lot of latitude to people. We had two freshmen from Massachusetts who wanted to do like boba reviews. They wanted to do video content for that. We basically handed them the username and password to our Instagram, and we're like, go for it, and just send us a draft whenever you're ready to publish. So I think in that sense, we are very happy to pass the leadership of TNJC down. And as for the three of us, I think we're just excited for whatever comes next in college and beyond.
That's really exciting. Well, I hope the Free Spirit program can help in the sense that, as you mentioned, when you got started, here you had a list and a connection to the top 51 high school journalists across the country representing every state in Washington, D.C. And now we have our 2021 Free Spirits, again gathering virtually this year. But, I think these students are so energized after this week, as you were, and often there's this feeling of, I wish we had a way to collaborate, to not just to stay in touch, but to actually collaborate as journalists. Well, now there's a mechanism for them to do so with TNJC. So I hope we can help facilitate the passing of the baton. So I know you all are very busy, and I appreciate you taking the time. With just a few minutes left, I want to go back to each of you with just a final thought or call to action, whether it's specifically related to TNJC as you prepare to bring in new young student leaders to run this publication, or whether it's for the media industry more broadly, based on your experience at TNJC and based on your perspective as young journalists, a message for the industry. So a call to action, I'd love to hear from each of you. And maybe we'll start with Willa, if that's okay.
Yeah. What I would say to that, I think, is just with my experience with TNJC, I've really been struck by the incredible communication that's happened between people who I never would have met or been in contact with before. And I think, like we've talked about with the election story and with the winter storm story, like we've been able to put out some content that is really unique and unheard of in your typical high school newspaper or magazine, because it's national. And so I guess a call to action would be just to recognize how powerful this kind of collaboration can be, and to recognize that even in a global pandemic, people have the tools and the technology and the platforms to create these connections. And so I would just encourage people to try to connect with people who they don't know or maybe don't think they have anything in common with, because I think that in journalism, when you're including the most diverse perspectives as possible, that's when the most powerful stories are able to be shared. So, yeah.
Thank you, Willa. Well put. Joshua, we'll go to you.
Sure. I think this goes out to the student journalists, and it's to basically keep doing what you do. I think Josh and I, over the course of this year, we've come to a pretty clear understanding just how difficult it is to be a student journalist, especially right now. I was the editor-in-chief of my campus newspaper, so it was literally as soon as the school day ended, I started hopping onto the TNJC Slack to start getting work done for that. I remember at one point in October when President Trump got COVID, Josh and I were texting each other. I was like, we should probably cover this, shouldn't we? And Josh was like, yeah. So he stayed up until like 2 a.m. Texas time, putting together an Instagram graphic. And then it was a little better for me. It's just midnight Pacific time. But the point is that student journalism can be really, really difficult. And it's probably one of the most unglamorous, tough, difficult, easy to get wrong things that I think any young person can do. But that's sort of what makes it so rewarding, right? And just having seen the dedication that's come from TNJC staffers, that's come from people in my own community doing super essential work, I would just say, keep going, keep doing what you're doing.
That's a great call to action. Josh, we'll close with you. You had this vision, you called Joshua, and now here we are, almost a year later, and you're reflecting back on TNJC. What's your call to action, whether for young journalists or for the industry, leaders in the media industry who might be interested in the TNJC model and what you all are doing?
I will say this is a very weird full circle moment, to be perfectly candid, just seeing this happening in reality. One thing I will say for sure is I love the fact that Joshua directed his messages toward student journalists, because I'm going to do the exact same. Being a student journalist, like Joshua said, especially this year, has been nearly impossible. You have to go through remote schooling. You have to go through unheard of challenges. I'm the yearbook editor of this year at my school, and half our school events are canceled. And I'm blessed and fortunate to be in person, but these challenges, these hurdles are difficult. But at the end of the day, just ask questions. That would be my honest call to action to just students in general, not even just journalists. If you are curious about the world around you, if you pose questions to ask, why do people think this way? Why do certain systems exist? Why does one state behave this way and another state and another? Why does some person believe one thing and another? It's this type of questioning that really yields true results. What TNJC is is a way to ask those questions and provide the answers for an audience. So that way, not everyone has to do the hard work of an interview and compiling a graphic and writing a story, because it's a lot of work. But if we as young people can just ask questions about the world around us, look to our neighbors to our right and left, our teachers in front, and even the younger generation beneath us that's growing up right now, I think the answers that we get are going to inform our world in a far more holistic way, A, and B, set up our future to be something sustainable where people's voices are heard, where democracy runs true, and where people feel like we are talking about the things that need to be discussed. So just ask questions and be curious.
Thank you, Josh. I love that. Well, thank you three so much for taking the time. And, every year at the Free Spirit Conference, I participated in this conference back in 2006 when I was in high school. And every year since, we talk with students about the power of dream, dare, do, which is really a motto that Al Newharth lived by and exemplified. And, we see so many examples of that in our Free Spirit Alumni Network, but this one really resonates. I mean, this is such a great example of dream, dare, do. You had the vision, you came together, you did it, and it's going to continue on. So I'm just really impressed and inspired by all three of you and your whole team at the New Journalism Collective. And for those watching, if you want to learn more, you can check out tnjcollective.com. And from there, you can see stories and also check out their Instagram. And you can learn more about the Free Spirit program at freespirit.org. Thanks so much, everyone.